My dad ripped my phone out of my hands so hard. It nearly sprained my wrist, then started going through my texts right in front of me. When I tried to grab it back, he shoved me away. When I stood frozen, he stared at me and said, "You were supposed to be mine." I didn't say a word. That was 2 years ago. Yesterday, I got a voicemail of him crying so hard I couldn't understand a word. Ever since I was a child, I knew there was something off about my family, especially my dad. I was 7 when I noticed him staring at me in a swimsuit for the first time. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it made me feel uncomfortable. So after that, I did everything I could to put distance between us. Whenever my mom left us alone, I'd try and sit as far away from him as possible. Or whenever we were in the car, I always insisted on sitting directly behind him instead of in the passenger seat, saying it made me carsick otherwise. My plan was working seamlessly until I turned 14 and hit puberty, because that's when me and my dad actually started getting close again. He started buying me things and gave me my own space. This went on for a year, which was long enough to make me believe that he was just overprotective when I was a child. We were spending all our time together, and he was the only adult that didn't make me feel like I was all alone in the world. He listened to me about everything, and always knew just the right thing to say to cheer me up, until I got a boyfriend. That's when everything changed. At first, my dad pretended to be supportive. He cracked awkward jokes, ruffled my hair, said stupid things like, "My little girl's growing up." I smiled and laughed along because I wanted so badly to believe it, to believe he was normal, to believe I hadn't wasted a year convincing myself he was safe. But then came the small punishments: canceling our movie nights, getting too busy for our drives, giving short, cold replies when I tried to talk about school or friends. I thought maybe he was just adjusting. Well, I was standing in the hallway texting my boyfriend when my dad walked past. He grabbed the phone from my hand so hard it nearly sprained my wrist. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he hissed. I froze. I had never seen him like this before, not even when I was a kid. He aggressively grabbed my phone and started going through all of our texts right in front of me. When I tried to grab it back, he shoved me off him. Not enough to throw me across the room, but enough to make it clear. The kindness had never been unconditional. When he was done reading, he didn't hand the phone back. He just stood there, silent, staring at me. For a second, I almost thought he was about to cry. And then he said it. The sentence that killed whatever was left of the little girl who wanted to believe she was safe. "You were supposed to be mine." My blood went cold, and in that moment, I knew I had to leave. Somewhere, anywhere else. But since I still didn't trust any other relative in my family, I had to make it subtle. So I called my aunt on my mom's side, asking if I could come over to visit. And that's how I spent my evening on a 3-hour bus ride, wondering whether or not my dad was truly, well, you know. The second she opened the door, my life changed forever, because she was smiling so hard her face was practically beaming. "Daisy, come here!" Her hug was so genuine it was almost enough to erase all the painful thoughts I was having. Almost. Because as soon as we got inside, I started crying my eyes out. I wasn't planning on telling her anything, but she stroked my hair and said, "I know about your dad, honey." This made me cry even harder, but I knew I had come to the right place. That week was the first time in years I actually felt safe. Every night before I slept, she tucked me in and gave me a new dream catcher for my nightmares. And every morning, she'd teach me how to meditate and self-regulate my emotions. It was the first time in my life that I didn't feel like a prize someone was trying to claim. Little did I know, that week ended up being the calm before the storm, because the next day, she handed me a help-wanted flyer for a job at a local old people's home. I told her I appreciated it, but I was too busy with school to work. She went completely silent and just left. But the next morning, everything felt off. She was smiling, but her eyes were cold. "You know," she said casually, "your parents keep calling. They miss you so much." My mouth went completely dry and I had to stop myself from crying. "But I'm sure you don't want them to know what we talked about, do you?" "I can only imagine what your grandparents would say. Your cousins, your friends." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. That's when she rehanded me the job flyer. I wanted to scream and beat her senseless, but I didn't. Instead, I took the flyer, plastered on a huge smile, and said, "Of course I'll take the job." She smiled to herself, thinking she had won. If there's one thing my dad taught me, it's to always hide your intentions. So even when she later demanded that I give her 70% of my paycheck, I agreed. And even when she blackmailed me into cleaning her house from top to bottom every weekend, I agreed. Not because I was a pushover, but because I was playing the long game, and soon everyone would regret how they treated me. The first step in my plan was to document everything. I started keeping a secret journal, recording every unreasonable demand, every insult, and every penny my aunt took from my paycheck. I hid it inside a hollowed-out math textbook that nobody would ever touch. My Aunt Susan thought I was just a dumb kid who would do whatever she wanted. She had no idea what was coming. My parents weren't any better. When I called home that first weekend, my mom asked if I was being grateful to Aunt Susan for the opportunity. Dad got on the phone and reminded me that family helps family, and I should stop complaining about the cleaning and the money. They didn't even ask if I was okay or how school was going. They just wanted me to keep Aunt Susan happy so they wouldn't have to deal with her themselves. I smiled through it all. At school, I joined the computer club and made friends with Jamie, a quiet kid who knew everything about technology. I casually mentioned my situation, and Jamie taught me how to set up hidden cameras. I bought 3 with my own money, the 30% of my paycheck that Aunt Susan let me keep. I placed them strategically, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, and one pointing at the front door. The cameras caught everything. Aunt Susan bringing home different men when she thought I was at work. Aunt Susan bad-mouthing my parents on the phone, calling them those idiots who dumped their problem child on her. Aunt Susan going through my backpack and reading my school assignments. And best of all, Aunt Susan telling her friend Barbara that she was milking this babysitting gig for all it's worth and laughing about how she was using my money to pay for her online shopping addiction. I saved every video file to a secure cloud account that Jamie helped me set up. Evidence was piling up, but I wasn't ready to use it yet. I needed more. Phase 2 of my plan started when Aunt Susan's birthday came around. I baked her favorite cake and bought her a nice bracelet with my own money. She seemed surprised by my generosity, and that's when I suggested that maybe I could help manage her finances since I was so good at math. She laughed at first, saying I was just a kid, but I persisted, showing her how I could set up a spreadsheet to track her expenses. Eventually, she agreed to let me help with her online banking, mostly because she was lazy and hated doing it herself. That's when I discovered Aunt Susan was deeply in debt. Credit cards maxed out, late payments on her car, and even a second mortgage on the house that my grandparents had left her. No wonder she wanted 70% of my paycheck. She was drowning financially, and I was her life raft. I started phase 3 by being even more helpful. I offered to pick up her mail and sort her bills. I volunteered to clean the entire house, not just on weekends. I even started cooking dinner most nights. Aunt Susan was thrilled with how mature I was becoming. My parents called to say how proud they were that I was finally growing up and being responsible. None of them realized I was gathering more information with every bill I opened, every drawer I organized, and every conversation I overheard. By month 3, I had enough dirt on Aunt Susan to bury her, but I still wasn't ready to make my move. I needed to be patient. The perfect opportunity came when Aunt Susan mentioned that her boss, Mr. Michael, was coming for dinner to discuss her potential promotion. She was nervous and asked me to help make everything perfect. I agreed enthusiastically. I cleaned the house until it sparkled. I prepared an amazing meal using a recipe I found online. I even set the table with the good china that Aunt Susan never used. She was impressed and actually thanked me, something she rarely did. When Mr. Michael arrived, I was polite and charming. I served the food and then excused myself to study in my room. But instead of studying, I monitored the hidden camera feed on my laptop. Aunt Susan was in full performance mode, taking credit for the clean house and the delicious meal. She even claimed that she had been mentoring me and turning me into a responsible young adult. Mr. Michael seemed impressed. That's when I implemented the next part of my plan. I had earlier placed an envelope on the coffee table, labeled Susan's financial records in large letters. During dinner, I had positioned it just within view from the dining room. As I watched on my laptop, Mr. Michael noticed the envelope and asked about it. Aunt Susan tried to dismiss it, but Mr. Michael, being nosy, picked it up when she went to the kitchen for dessert. Inside were copies of Aunt Susan's credit card statements, showing large purchases from luxury stores on company days when she had called in sick. There were also printouts of emails where she had bad-mouthed Mr. Michael to colleagues. I had carefully selected what to include, nothing that would destroy her completely, just enough to damage her chances at the promotion. Mr. Michael's face changed as he read through the documents. When Aunt Susan returned, he made an excuse about an emergency and left quickly. Aunt Susan was confused until she saw the open envelope on the table. Her scream of rage echoed through the house. She burst into my room, waving the papers and accusing me of sabotaging her. I put on my most innocent face and asked what was wrong. She couldn't prove I had done anything deliberately. After all, I was just an irresponsible kid who had carelessly left some papers out, right? That's what she had been telling everyone about me. The next day, Aunt Susan didn't get the promotion. She was furious and took it out on me, demanding that I now give her 80% of my paycheck and clean the house daily. I agreed with fake tears in my eyes. My parents called that weekend, and when I tried to explain what was happening, they told me to stop being dramatic and be grateful for everything Aunt Susan was doing for me. That's when I decided it was time for phase 4. I compiled all my evidence, the videos, the financial records, the nasty texts Aunt Susan had sent about my parents, and prepared 3 separate packages, one for my parents, one for Aunt Susan's workplace, and one that I would keep as insurance. I waited until Aunt Susan was at work, then called my parents and told them I needed to talk about something important. They sighed and said they were busy, but I insisted. I emailed them the first package of evidence while we were on the phone. I heard their shocked gasps as they opened the videos and documents. For once, they were speechless. There's more, I told them calmly, and if you don't help me get out of here, Aunt Susan's boss will receive his package tomorrow. My dad started yelling about family loyalty, but my mom was quieter. She had seen enough to know this was serious. I explained my terms. I wanted to move back home. I wanted an apology from both of them for abandoning me. me, and I wanted them to confront Aunt Susan about her behavior. They agreed reluctantly. My mom drove up the next day to get me. Aunt Susan came home early and found us packing my things. She started screaming about ungrateful brats and threatened to call the police for the cameras I had installed. That's when I calmly showed her the third package, the one with evidence of her bringing strange men into a house where a minor was living, her financial fraud, and her workplace misconduct. "You can call the police," I said quietly, "but then I'll have to show them all of this." The look on her face was priceless. For the first time, she saw me, really saw me, not as a pushover kid, but as someone who had been playing her all along. My mom stood by, shocked at both the evidence and my transformation. As we drove away, my mom kept glancing at me nervously in the rearview mirror. She asked if I had really planned all of this from the beginning. I just smiled and looked out the window. The game wasn't over yet. My parents still didn't understand that their betrayal was just as bad as Aunt Susan's. They thought bringing me home was the end of it. They had no idea that Phase 5 was just beginning. Phase 5 was simple: make them all pay. Not just Aunt Susan, but my parents too. They thought they were rescuing me, but they were just as guilty. They had sent me to live with her in the first place. They had chosen their careers over me. And when I tried to tell them something was wrong, they never listened. I spent the first week back home playing the traumatized victim. It wasn't hard. I cried at random times. I jumped when doors closed too loudly. I picked at my food. My parents walked on eggshells around me, whispering when they thought I couldn't hear. "She needs therapy," my mom said one night, her voice carrying through the thin walls of our suburban home. "She needs time," my dad argued, always the optimist. "She'll bounce back." They were both wrong. What I needed was access to their computers, phones, and financial information, and their guilt was making it easy to get. I started small. When my mom left her laptop open, I installed a keylogger. When my dad put his phone down to shower, I memorized his passcode. I found their tax returns in the office filing cabinet. I discovered my mom's secret email account where she talked to some guy named Robert from work, a little too friendly. I found my dad's hidden poker app where he'd lost thousands of dollars. They had secrets too. Everyone did. At school, I was the quiet girl who'd returned after a family emergency. The teachers gave me extensions on assignments. The counselor called me in twice a week for check-ins that I navigated carefully. I needed to appear damaged but improving. Not so broken they'd send me to a real therapist who might see through me. Meanwhile, Aunt Susan was facing charges for financial fraud. My parents thought that was justice, completely clueless to what was coming. My opportunity came when my parents announced they were going to a weekend work retreat together. They hesitated, worried about leaving me alone so soon after the incident, as they called it. My mother twisted her wedding ring nervously as they discussed it in the kitchen. "I'll be fine," I assured them with just the right amount of brave fragility in my voice. Jessica from math class invited me for a sleepover anyway. There was no Jessica. There was no sleepover. There was just me, alone in the house for 48 hours. As soon as their car disappeared down the street, I got to work. I used my mom's work email to send a series of inappropriate messages to her boss. Nothing too obvious, just subtle comments that would make him uncomfortable and plant seeds of doubt about her professionalism. From my dad's phone, I sent text messages to his biggest clients canceling upcoming meetings, citing personal issues. I accessed their joint bank account and scheduled several large donations to random charities for the following month when they wouldn't be paying close attention. Small disruptions. Nothing catastrophic. Not yet. The real target was still Aunt Susan. She was out on bail, awaiting trial. Her reputation was already in tatters, but I wanted more. I wanted her to feel what I felt, betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect her. I created a fake email account pretending to be her lawyer. I sent messages to all her friends detailing her confession to the crimes and more, things she hadn't even done. I made it sound like she was blaming them, saying they had put pressure on her to maintain her lifestyle. By Sunday night, her phone would be exploding with angry former friends. When my parents returned Sunday evening, I was curled up on the couch with a book, the perfect picture of recovery. The lamp cast a soft glow that hid the cold satisfaction in my eyes. "How was your sleepover?" my mom asked, setting down her overnight bag. I told her it was nice to feel normal again. She smiled, relieved. They had no idea what was coming. Over the next few weeks, the chaos I'd created began to unfold. My mom was called into a meeting with HR about her inappropriate communications. My dad's clients were angry about the canceled meetings. Their bank called about the unusual donation activity. They were confused, stressed, arguing late into the night. I would lie awake listening to their heated whispers, a small smile playing on my lips in the darkness. "Someone must have hacked our accounts," my dad insisted, his voice rising in frustration. "They changed all their passwords, not realizing I was watching every move. New passwords meant nothing when I had access to their devices." Aunt Susan's preliminary hearing was approaching. My parents asked if I wanted to attend. I said yes, my voice small but determined. They thought I wanted closure. What I wanted was to watch her face when the next part of my plan activated. The night before the hearing, I sent an anonymous package to the prosecutor with printouts of all the additional financial documents I'd found in Aunt Susan's house, the ones I hadn't given to my parents. Documents that showed my dad had known about some of her schemes, had even benefited from them. I had discovered them in a hidden compartment of her antique desk, the one she never let me touch. The morning of the hearing, hearing, we sat in the courtroom, my parents on either side of me like protective bookends. The wooden benches were hard and uncomfortable, much like the truths about to be revealed. Aunt Susan sat at the defendant's table, her once perfect hair now dull, her designer clothes replaced by something plain and appropriate for court. She didn't look at us. When the prosecutor stood and mentioned new evidence that implicated additional parties, my dad stiffened beside me. When the prosecutor specifically mentioned my father's name, my mom gasped. I kept my eyes down, playing the part of the confused child. The judge called for a recess. In the hallway, my parents argued in harsh whispers. My dad insisted he knew nothing about Susan's schemes. My mom wasn't believing him. I stood silently, watching their marriage crack right before my eyes. Did you know about this? My mom finally asked me, her voice breaking, her mascara slightly smudged from fighting back tears. I looked up with wide, innocent eyes. About what? The hearing was postponed. We drove home in complete silence. My dad was now under investigation too. My mom moved into the guest bedroom that night. Phase 5 was working perfectly. Over the next month, everything fell apart for them. My dad had to hire his own lawyer, an expensive one with slicked back hair and cufflinks that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage. My mom took a leave of absence from work after the email scandal. Their joint accounts were frozen during the investigation. Aunt Susan, desperate to save herself, started telling authorities that my dad was the mastermind behind everything. I watched it all with quiet satisfaction. At night, I added to my journal, documenting every step of my revenge. Sometimes I wondered if I was going too far, but then I'd remember the year I spent with Aunt Susan, how she'd manipulated me, used me, made me feel worthless while stealing my inheritance, how my parents had abandoned me to her. No, they deserved this. My mom started drinking wine every afternoon. My dad spent most nights at a hotel. They thought I was coping well because I kept my grades up and joined the debate team. They were too wrapped up in their own problems to notice I was thriving on their destruction. Then came the day my mom found my journal. I'd gotten careless, left it under my mattress instead of in my locked box. She came into my room holding it, her face white, her hands shaking. The leather-bound book looked small in her trembling fingers. "What is this?" she whispered. "Please tell me this isn't real." I could have lied. I could have said it was creative writing, a way to process my trauma. But looking at her broken expression, I decided it was time for the final phase, the truth. "You sent me away," I said simply. "You chose your careers over me, and when I needed you most, you didn't listen." She sank onto my bed, flipping through pages of my detailed plans. "You did all this? The emails, the donations, your father's investigation?" I nodded. "You're just a child," she said, but her voice held fear now. She was finally seeing me clearly. "I stopped being a child the day you left me with her," I replied. My mom looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. The daughter she knew had died during that year with Aunt Susan. What remained was someone else entirely. "What happens now?" she asked. I smiled. That was the interesting question, wasn't it? Phase 5 was complete. Everyone had paid for what they did to me, but I hadn't planned a Phase 6. I guess I'd have to improvise. I took a step toward my mother, watching her flinch. It was almost funny how she feared me now. This woman who had abandoned me, who had chosen her new husband over her own daughter, was now looking at me like I was the monster. The marble countertop gleamed between us, spotless like everything else in her life, except for me. "I think I'll take a vacation," I said casually, running my finger along the cool surface. "I've earned it, don't you think?" My mother nodded quickly, probably hoping I'd disappear from her life again, but this time on my terms, not hers. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her designer cardigan closer to her body. I left her standing in her perfect kitchen in her perfect house, the one she'd built with Richard while forgetting I existed. The satisfaction I felt walking away was better than I'd imagined during those long nights at Aunt Susan's house, staring at the water-stained ceiling, wondering why I wasn't enough. 3 months later, I was sitting on a beach in Florida. The sun felt good on my skin, and the sound of the waves helped quiet my mind. My phone buzzed with a text from Casey, my only real friend from college who knew nothing about what I'd done. She'd stood by me through my darkest days, never questioning why I sometimes disappeared into myself. "How's the vacation going?" she asked. I smiled and sent back a beach selfie, my sunglasses hiding the coldness that had settled permanently in my eyes. I didn't tell her that this wasn't just a vacation. This was me figuring out Phase 6. My revenge had been perfect. Dad lost his job after I anonymously sent evidence of his embezzlement to his boss. Richard's political career ended when those photos of him with his intern leaked. Mom's social standing crumbled when her friends discovered she'd abandoned her daughter. And Aunt Susan, well, she wouldn't be hurting any more children after what I did. The recordings I'd secretly made during my visits were enough to ensure that, but something felt unfinished. They had all paid, but they still didn't understand what they'd created when they broke me. They thought I was done. That's where they were wrong. I scrolled through my phone to the folder labeled Insurance. Inside were more secrets, more evidence, more ways to destroy them if they ever came after me. But maybe there was another use for it all. My laptop pinged with an email notification. It was from my mother, the first contact since our confrontation. The subject line read simply, "Please, please come home," she wrote. "We need to talk. We can fix this." I laughed out loud, startling a nearby sunbather. Fix this? There was no fixing what had been done to me, but her email gave me an idea. I closed my laptop and watched the waves crash against the shore, formulating my next move with each rhythmic pulse of the ocean. 2 weeks later, I was back in my hometown. I rented a small apartment instead of staying with any family. I needed my own space, my own fortress to plan from. The bare walls and minimal furniture suited me. Nothing like the cluttered, suffocating environment of Aunt Susan's house or the sterile perfection of my mother's home. I called my mother and agreed to meet her for coffee. When I arrived at the cafe, I was surprised to find not just her, but my father and Richard too. A little family reunion. How touching. They all looked terrible. Dad had aged 10 years and 3 months. His once proud posture now stooped, his confident smile replaced with nervous glances. Richard's confident politician smile was gone, replaced by a grim line that aged his once handsome face. And my mother's hands shook as she clutched her coffee cup, her manicured nails tapping an anxious rhythm against the ceramic. They took turns trying to convince me to stop whatever I was doing. They apologized, made excuses, even tried to blame each other. I just smiled and listened, savoring each desperate word. Little did they know I wasn't actively doing anything to them anymore. Their own guilt and fear were doing all the work for me. "I forgive you," I said finally, watching their faces light up with hope like starving people offered a feast. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I laid out my terms. Dad would pay for my college tuition that he'd promised years ago. Richard would use his remaining connections to help me get an internship at a good company. Mom would tell the entire family the truth about leaving me with Aunt Susan. They agreed quickly, probably thinking they were getting off easy. Little did they know, Phase 6 wasn't about more revenge. It was about using them to build my future while they lived in fear of what else I might do. Aunt Susan called me a week later. Her voice was small and frightened on the phone, nothing like the authoritarian tone she'd used when I lived under her roof. "The police came by again," she said. "Someone keeps reporting me for things I didn't do." I made sympathetic noises while smiling to myself. The anonymous tips I'd been sending weren't enough to get her arrested, just enough to keep her paranoid and under scrutiny, just enough to make her feel what I felt. Always watched, always judged, never safe. "That's terrible," I told her. "Maybe you should move away, start fresh somewhere else." She took my advice, selling her house at a loss and moving to another state. Another small victory. I imagined her packing up her things, looking over her shoulder, wondering if she was being watched, just like I used to do. By Christmas, I had everything I wanted. A good internship thanks to Richard, tuition paid by Dad, and a family that now walked on eggshells around me. At the holiday dinner at my grandparents' house, I watched my mother nervously explain to everyone why she'd left me behind years ago. The family's disapproving looks were better than any present. "You've changed," my grandmother told me privately, her eyes searching mine for the granddaughter she remembered. "There's something different about you." I just smiled. I grew up. In January, I started my internship. My boss, Jordan, was impressed with my work ethic and attention to detail. She didn't know those skills had been honed planning elaborate revenge schemes, documenting every slight, every hurt, every betrayal until I had enough ammunition to destroy my family. "You're going to go far," she told me after I completed a difficult project ahead of schedule. I believed her. For the first time, I was looking forward instead of backward. But that didn't mean I'd forgotten. Every few weeks, I'd send one of my family members a small reminder that I was watching. A photo to my dad of his new office, a copy of Richard's private calendar sent to his email, a package to my mother containing the bracelet she'd left behind when she moved out years ago. Nothing threatening, nothing explicit, just enough to keep them wondering what I might do next, just enough to make sure they never felt completely safe. By summer, I had been promoted at work. I had my own apartment, my own money, and my own life. The control I'd fought so hard for was finally mine. I decorated my new place with careful precision, everything in its place, everything under my control. Casey visited me in July, marveling at how well I was doing. "I don't get it," she said as we had dinner at a nice restaurant I could now afford. "A year ago, you were barely functioning, and now look at you." I shrugged. I found my motivation. What I didn't tell her was that my family was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. They didn't understand that keeping them afraid was better than any additional revenge I could take. Their imagination of what I might do was far worse than anything I would actually do. In August, I got a letter from Aunt Susan. She was sick. She wrote, "Cancer." She wanted to make amends before it was too late. The paper was tear-stained, her handwriting shaky. I read the letter twice, then filed it away with my other, insurance. No response needed. Let her wonder if I'd even received it. Let her face her mortality with the same uncertainty she'd forced me to live with. My mother called me on my birthday in September. "We're having a family dinner," she said hesitantly. "Will you come?" I agreed, curious to see them all together again. When I arrived at my parents' parents' old house, everyone was there. Dad, looking smaller somehow. Richard, still trying to project confidence but failing. Mom, nervous as always around me now. And surprisingly, my grandparents. They had a cake, presents, even balloons. A perfect family celebration. Anyone looking in from the outside would think we were normal. During dinner, my father cleared his throat. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that we're all very proud of how well you're doing." The others nodded quickly in agreement. I smiled. They still didn't get it. They thought I'd moved on, that I was better now. They were completely blindsided to the fact that every success I achieved was another form of revenge. Every promotion, every accomplishment was my way of showing them what they had almost destroyed. "Thank you," I said sweetly. "I couldn't have done it without you." They looked relieved, taking my words as forgiveness rather than the accusation they were. As I blew out the candles on my cake, I made a wish, not for more revenge, but for the strength to keep building my life while they remained trapped in the prison of fear I'd created for them. Phase 6, it turned out, wasn't about destroying them further. It was about thriving while they withered. And from the looks on their faces as I opened my presents, it was working perfectly. I smiled as I unwrapped the expensive watch from my mother. It was exactly what I'd asked for. Not because I wanted it, but because I knew it would strain their budget. The silver band gleamed under the dining room lights, almost as brightly as the discomfort in my father's eyes. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat while my Aunt Karen kept glancing at her phone, probably checking her dwindling bank account. The tension in the room was delicious. "It's perfect," I said, my voice sweet with fake gratitude. I slipped it onto my wrist, making a show of admiring how it caught the light. "You always know exactly what I want." The party continued with forced smiles and nervous laughter. My college friends, who knew nothing about my history with my family, chatted happily over cake and punch. They saw me as the successful psychology major with a bright future, the girl with perfect grades and insightful comments during class discussions. They had no idea that every theory I learned in class was being tested on the people who had once abandoned me. Every principle of cognitive dissonance, every lesson on manipulation and guilt, all applied with surgical precision. After everyone left, I stayed behind to help clean up. My parents looked exhausted, dark circles under their eyes and slumped shoulders betraying their fatigue. Good. Phase 6 was working perfectly. The constant worry was wearing them down exactly as I'd planned. "I got that internship at the counseling center," I mentioned casually while collecting paper plates stained with frosting. "The director says I have a natural talent for understanding people's weaknesses. She thinks I could have a promising career in psychological assessment." My father dropped a trash bag. The sound of bottles clinking inside punctuated the sudden silence. My mother's smile froze on her face, her lipstick slightly smeared at one corner. "That's wonderful, honey," she managed to say, her fingers nervously twisting her wedding ring. I nodded. "I'm thinking of specializing in family trauma. I have so much personal experience to draw from." I let the words hang in the air, heavy with implication. The look they exchanged was priceless. A flash of panic, quickly suppressed. They never knew if my comments were innocent or loaded with hidden meaning. That uncertainty was my greatest weapon, sharper than any direct accusation could ever be. When I left their house that night, the cool evening air felt refreshing after hours in that pressure cooker of anxiety. I checked my secret email account while waiting for my Uber. The messages from their coworkers, neighbors, and friends kept flowing in. Little bits of gossip and information that I collected like precious gems. People loved talking about my parents and aunt, especially after I'd planted those carefully crafted rumors. A suggestion here about my father's financial troubles, a hint there about my mother's drinking problem that didn't actually exist. My apartment felt peaceful compared to the tension at my parents' house. The silence welcomed me like an old friend. On my wall hung a large corkboard with photos, notes, and timelines, my roadmap for the next phase. Red string connected certain events, blue sticky notes marked completed tasks. I'd learned that revenge wasn't just about big dramatic moments. It was about the slow, constant pressure that eventually breaks people, like water torture, one drop at a time until sanity cracks. The next morning, I visited Aunt Karen at her workplace. She managed a small clothing boutique that was struggling to stay open, the racks of last season's fashion testament to her failing business acumen. I brought coffee and muffins, playing the role of the loving niece. The bell above the door announced my arrival, and her initial smile quickly turned wary. "Business looks slow," I observed, watching her face fall as I handed her the paper cup. The store was empty except for a bored-looking cashier scrolling through her phone. "It's just a temporary slump," she insisted, straightening a display of scarves with trembling hands. I nodded sympathetically. Must be hard after those customer complaints online. Her head snapped up. "What complaints?" I feigned surprise, widening my eyes just enough. "Oh, you haven't seen them. There are dozens of one-star reviews about rude service and overpriced items. I assumed you knew." She didn't know because I'd only posted them last night, using different accounts and IP addresses. I'd spent hours crafting believable complaints, each one specific enough to seem legitimate. By tomorrow, her boss would see them too. "I'll help you look into it," I offered kindly, touching her arm in a gesture of support. My father called that evening, his voice strained. He'd been passed over for a promotion again, the third time in 18 months. I expressed sympathy while secretly checking off another item on my list. The anonymous email I'd sent to his boss suggesting he couldn't handle pressure had worked perfectly. I'd included just enough details about his anxiety issues to seem like a concerned colleague rather than a saboteur. My mother was struggling too. Her book club friends had slowly stopped inviting her to events. They'd all received different versions of stories about things she'd supposedly said about them. None of it was true, but doubt spreads faster than truth. Like a virus, suspicion needs only the smallest entry point to infect a relationship. 2 months after my birthday, I invited them all to dinner at my apartment. They came, of course. They always came when I called, desperate to stay in my good graces. I watched them file in, each looking more defeated than the last. My apartment was spotless, my outfit carefully chosen to show success without flaunting it. The table was set with the fine china I'd bought specifically for this occasion. I served a meal that cost more than they could afford these days. Imported cheese, prime cuts of meat, wine that cost more than my father's daily wage. "How are things at the store, Aunt Karen?" I asked innocently, refilling her wine glass for the third time. She looked down at her plate, pushing around a piece of roasted asparagus. "I've been let go. And Dad, any news about that promotion?" He shook his head, the overhead light reflecting off his thinning hair. "Mom, how's the book club?" She murmured something about being too busy lately, her once confident voice now barely audible. I nodded sympathetically while satisfaction bloomed inside me. They were crumbling, just as I'd planned. The best part was that they had no proof I was behind any of it, just their growing suspicion and fear, the nagging sense that their misfortunes weren't coincidental. After dinner, I showed them my acceptance letter to a prestigious graduate program. Their congratulations sounded hollow. They knew that with each success, I grew stronger while they weakened. The power dynamic had completely reversed from my childhood. "I've been thinking about family a lot," I said, pouring them more wine. "About how important it is to have people you can trust." They nodded eagerly, desperately hoping I was offering forgiveness. "It's sad how easily trust can be broken," I continued, "and how impossible it is to truly rebuild it." Their faces fell in perfect unison, hope extinguished like candles in a sudden draft. Later that week, I ran into my father's boss at a coffee shop. It wasn't a coincidence. I'd learned his schedule months ago. I'd been accidentally bumping into him every few weeks, building rapport. We chatted casually until I mentioned my father's name. His boss frowned, coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Such a shame about those accounting discrepancies," he said. I widened my eyes in fake surprise. "Discrepancies?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "I probably shouldn't discuss it." "Of course not," I agreed. "I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding." But it wasn't. The evidence I'd planted would ensure my father's reputation was permanently damaged. The numbers didn't add up because I'd made sure they wouldn't. By Christmas, my revenge was nearly complete. My parents' marriage was strained to breaking point. My aunt had moved to another city, unable to find work locally after her reputation was ruined. My father was under investigation at work. My mother had lost most of her friends. I sent them all expensive Christmas gifts with cards expressing my love and concern. The guilt those gifts caused was worth every penny. I imagined them opening the packages, wondering if they were peace offerings or reminders of what they'd lost. On New Year's Eve, I sat alone in my apartment, looking at my corkboard of plans. Most items were checked off. My family was suffering, just as I had suffered when they abandoned me. Justice had been served, yet something felt hollow. I'd expected more satisfaction from watching them fall apart. Instead, I felt nothing, empty. The revenge that had driven me for years had consumed everything else. I took down the corkboard and put it in a box, not because I regretted what I'd done, but because I no longer needed it. They would continue to suffer without my active involvement. The seeds of destruction I'd planted would grow on their own. The next day, I applied for a study abroad program in Europe. It was time to step away and let my revenge complete itself naturally. I didn't need to watch anymore. When I told my parents I was leaving the country, the panic in their eyes was clear. Without me nearby, they had no chance to earn forgiveness they so desperately wanted. They offered to help financially, to visit, to do anything to keep me close. I declined politely. "I need to focus on my future," I told them. 3 weeks later, I boarded a plane with no intention of coming back anytime soon. As we took off, I thought about my family, likely still sitting by their phones, waiting for calls that would never come, hoping for forgiveness they would never receive. Some might call it cruel to leave them in limbo forever. I called it justice. They would spend the rest of their lives trying to figure out if I knew what they'd done, if I was behind their misfortunes, if I would ever truly forgive them. They would never know for sure, and that uncertainty would be their prison long after I'd moved on. The plane climbed higher, and I closed my eyes. Phase 7, it turned out, wasn't about revenge at all. It was about freedom.